I am thrilled that more often in the public space, you can see the voices of people who say directly that they broke off contact with their mothers. I did it several years ago, meeting then with a complete misunderstanding of the environment and contempt, because, how you can do that to your mother, says Agata, name changed, in response to the story of Eva, who her mother rejected. I was not an unwanted child. I was wanted and planned. If you can talk about a conscious decision to have a child at the age of 23, only until my mother got bored, writes a woman who consciously broke off contact with her parent and did not want to forgive her. My mother led me to a state where I carefully planned my suicide because I did not see a way out of the situation. She did everything to ensure that I was always dependent on her and had no chance of becoming independent. A happy coincidence meant that instead of going to the grave, I ended up in a mental health clinic for children and young people, admits Eva. More and more, I began to hear from my mother's side that I was a parasite and cancer. Her voice was also joined by the rest of the family, telling me that I was sitting on her hump and threatening me that if I did not take a job and start contributing to household expenses would get me kicked out of the house, she recalls. A situation in which a child decides not to maintain contact with a parent does not happen just like that. Instead, the parent impacts the relationship with the child for at least a dozen or so years, the author believes. Although it doesn't seem like long ago, the perception of such topics has changed a lot. I keep my fingers crossed that it will continue to change and support those who experience similar behavior from parents. Unfortunately, as the author of the letter wrote, neither society nor psychologists are fully prepared to help people like us who experience psychological violence at home. Mental abuse. Google's most pop-up results relate to toxic marriages but very little to parent-child relationships. And if such information appears, they usually do not distinguish between psychological and physical violence, often touching on alcoholism, as if everything goes hand in hand each time. Meanwhile, psychological violence is not rare in good homes, and it stays with the child forever. I was not an unwanted child. I was wanted and planned. If you can talk about a conscious decision to have a child at 23, until my mother got bored of it. Unfortunately, it turned out that a pink baby in a pram will not always be a pink baby that you can brag about to your friends. Still, after a few years, he will become a little man with his opinions, needs, and problems. Although I broke off contact with my mother when I was 20, only today do I understand more mechanisms that I did not know as a child or teenager. And I see how much my mother was destroying me. She thought I was embarrassing her. Although I remember the first few years of my childhood as happy, everything changed when I went to school. My mother wanted me to attend the school where she worked as a teacher. Officially it was out of concern. In practice, it was about control over me, which my mother's friends were happy to take advantage of. The other teachers quickly made fun of informing me, seeing that my mother was eager to hear about all this and immediately drew the consequences before their eyes. To this day, I regret how often I had to humiliate myself with an official apology in the teacher's lounge for the absolute trifles that teachers wrote in my diary to enjoy my humiliation. My mother could never stand up for me. She just thought I was an embarrassment to her. I wasn't a bad kid. I studied well and participated in numerous competitions, many of which I won. But, as I discovered years later from my dad, he was arguing with my mother so that her friends would stop being harsh on me and judging me more harshly than other children. He knew nothing about the diary notes because my mother effectively began cutting him off any information, stating that it was none of his business. My mother's influence didn't stop at school, however. In small towns, everyone knows each other, and the teacher position is still prestigious. To this day, I don't know how my mother managed to get her friends to report me. I say, friends, even though I don't know who these people are because I've never held anyone's hand. Yet my mother always knew where I was, with whom, and what I was doing, even if she was at work, in another city, or anywhere else at the time. Sometimes, she would nonchalantly state over dinner that something I had told someone about her the day before was not true, even though she wasn't there for the conversation. She loved to eavesdrop at my door, making me stop inviting friends to my house. She also regularly cleaned my room in my absence. Not that she didn't like the mess, but it allowed her to rummage through my papers and records. She did all this officially out of concern for me. Before I was fully aware of what she was doing, I kept a diary for a brief moment. As long as I am a child, I have no right to freedom. One day, over dinner, my mother openly raised the subject of the situations I presented in it and summed up my anger at the invasion of my freedom and privacy by saying that as long as I am a child, I have no right to freedom. I will never forget the first time I watched The Truman Show, feeling that this movie was 100% true to the truth. How I perceive my reality. My mother thought it was her duty as a parent to be in control. I'm exaggerating as usual because I'm a terrible, rebellious child. At the same time, she did not have any conversations with me. She needed to be more interested in who I was, what I did, and what I believed. So, instead of spending time with me, she preferred to go out with friends and family. She said she did not want to waste her time on me and that the information gathered from other people's notes and stories about me reflected the actual state better than any conversation with me because every child always lies. I love you. I have yet to hear them from my mother. Sorry. She never uttered this word because it was synonymous with admitting guilt and recognizing the superiority of the other person. I can't count how many times she made fun of me in front of family, friends, and even strangers, and how many of my private things she told others about. My first period? The teachers knew about it the same day. A few came up to me during breaks and asked if I was sure I was okay and if I needed a sanitary napkin. Later, I talked to my mother about how she humiliated me and that I had no intention of sharing my first period with the teaching staff. She swore I was exaggerating, not telling anyone my secrets, and it was a complete coincidence. But how was I supposed to believe her when it was so evident to me, and the evidence always pointed otherwise? For my mother, I was always an evil criminal, drug addict, alcoholic, and social fringe. She loved telling me about situations that never happened and bending reality. No evidence, no arguments, no pleas reached her. I planned suicide. She played with me with sadistic pleasure, considering it her educational duty. It wasn't until years later that I discovered the word, gaslighting, and was surprised to find that I know these mechanisms 100%. Even here, Google search results indicate that the problem is mainly related to toxic marriages, not relationships with children. My mother's screams and waving of her arms were the order of the day, as was endless self-pity, which wouldn't be half as hard if it weren't for my presence. She led me to a state where I carefully planned my suicide because I saw no way out of the situation. She did everything so that I was always dependent on her and had no chance of becoming independent. By a happy coincidence, I ended up in a mental health clinic for children and adolescents instead of going to the grave. Unfortunately, as the author of the earlier letter already wrote, psychologists and psychiatrists are primarily prepared for our problems. Due to my minor age, my mother also had to attend visits. As a result, some sessions took place separately, once with me, once with her, and rarely together. I remember to this day the contempt with which the psychiatrist and the psychologist treated me. My feelings from that time were also confirmed years later when, as an adult, I picked up a copy of the papers from the clinic, wanting to verify certain things. Over the years, my mother became an absolute master in creating a new reality that had nothing to do with the truth. The first visit to the clinic was when I met another mother. She is crying, concerned, overwhelmed by problems, and does not know how to deal with her child, to whom she provides everything she wants. It was the moment when I gained hope for repairing our relationship. I naively believed that my problems had shaken her and sobered her up. But my hope was dashed when I first tried to hug her when I got home, and she pushed me away. A few hours later that night, after taking antidepressants, I was forced to ask her for an emergency pill for the side effects. Instead, I heard, "It's night. I don't care. Come with it in the morning." You can only learn from books. Neither the psychiatrist nor the psychologist believed what I told about my mother because she presented herself in meetings with them from a completely different side than the one she gave at home. Therefore, they never went into these topics in depth, focusing instead on whether I had any friends or boyfriends who might be a bad influence on me. Only today, I know that none of these ladies were fit for their job. Something snapped in my mother when I was about to go to college. She did not allow me to study in another city, arguing that she must keep an eye on me because I have mental problems and am too immature to live independently. I had no choice. I had to agree to the university closest to my hometown, looking with envy at my friends who started their studies at more renowned universities. Seeing that the daily commute of several hours and the pace overwhelmed me, my mother found a chance for me to continue having fun. She ordered that from now on, we go to bed at 8 p.m. Considering I was returning home just before 8 p.m., I could eat dinner and wash up. Still, I had not been able to study or do homework. My mother was disturbed by the lights on, the sounds coming from my room, and the magnetic waves from the router on, which caused her to disconnect my internet regularly. According to my mother, the time I spend on the buses should be spent studying, which should be enough for me. The switched-off light in the intercity bus was no argument for her, nor was the fact that the bus kept vibrating and bouncing on the road, preventing me from writing anything. Meanwhile, in the academic sphere, it was the moment when my lecturers began to timidly use the first e-learning platforms, sharing some tasks only online. No conversations with my mother about it were fruitful because whenever I tried to explain anything to her and explain that I needed space to study, she wouldn't listen, change the subject, or leave the house. She said the time spent on the bus to study was insufficient because I was too weak to look. And using the internet to help myself is my invention because you can only learn from books.